Hello again, welcome to the second part of this lecture for week 2. And this week we've been looking at engagement in the mathematics classroom, and this is something that will pervade all the rest of the course and is an issue that's become increasingly important as more and more students seem to be disengaged from mathematics. So today we want to give you some ideas and some foundations and also some practical things, but also hopefully things about engagement are things that you'll see right across your tutorials and your lectures throughout this course. So in this part, here's some of the things I want to cover. First of all, a rationale for engagement, how you might come to understand engagement a little bit using this theoretical framework. And certainly if you're in your tutorial, some of your tutors have used this framework to explicitly research students' engagement in mathematics. And then we'll look at how you can notice it as a teacher, some conceptual ideas about maths, and then how we can, just a few basic ideas about how you might go about it. But again, one of the most important things as a teacher of mathematics is, as you go about your task in the classroom, is you not only teach students content and skills, but you also make sure you engage them and they understand and want to continue in mathematics after they're done. So first of all, why do we need to worry about student engagement? Well, first of all, one of the things we know is that students' engagement is really important because it can be a real strong predictor of success. Now, this might be the influence of this might go both ways. Maybe if kids are successful, they are more likely to be engaged. But certainly students who are disengaged are also very likely to be unsuccessful and then eventually drop out. So making sure the students are engaged in their learning and interested and trying to participate fully is really important for their success. And it also is important because students, as they leave school, need to have a sense of engagement and comfortableness and confidence with mathematics because it's so important for their future career. You will know, as those studying to be primary school teachers, that you actually can't get in to be a primary school teacher unless you have Year 12 mathematics, or some of you may have had to do some sort of bridging program. So what we want is students to stay motivated and to be engaged so that they're not hindered in their life opportunities through the rest of schooling and after school. The other thing is, when you get information about student engagement, and we encourage you to try and get some formal evidence about student engagement as you're teaching, it's really helpful to help you adjust your teaching. Because sometimes we as teachers think something might be engaging for students, but students might not necessarily see the same thing as of interest. So trying to find out what's engaging them and connecting with them is really important, and it also helps you connect it to the real world, and not that school's not real world, but things that they do beyond school. So as with the other weeks, there's a link there you can follow, and these slides of course will be in the Learning at Griffith site. And I encourage you to look at that afterwards. I'm not going to put it through you now, but there's some questions for you to consider as you watch it and after you watch it. But some key things to think about. What is the nature of student engagement with mathematics? How do you help students engage in mathematics? Is it just about having fun? Or is it something deeper than that? Sometimes we often use the word fun in the same way we might call something a fun run, which to me seems like a bit of an oxymoron. But fun doesn't just mean frivolous and light-hearted, it can also mean something deep and captivating that people's interest. So are students showing interest and engagement? Are they discussing ideas? Are they thinking about it after the lesson's finishing? Is it connecting to their wider lives? Some of those things are characteristics of an engaging mathematics classroom. But I encourage you to look at that video after and consider these questions in the light of your own teaching career. And again, the nature of student engagement here, I've put up a theoretical model. This comes from some famous theorists about engagement. They're not necessarily about maths education, just engagement generally. And I appreciate that those text is quite small for you to read. It's really there so you can follow it up after. But essentially, it's got three parts to student engagement. The first one is in behavioural engagement. So are they engaged in doing what's going on? Are they participating? Are they trying things? This is what we call behavioural engagement. What they do, their behaviours in response to what's being presented to them in the classroom. And behavioural engagement is often a good indicator of the others because it's something you can actually see and notice. The second part is what we'd call emotional engagement. Other students seem to be invested in it and interested in it, some sort of excitement or enjoyment out of participating. Do they want to keep going? Can you see some sort of emotional connection to what's going on? Or are they could be participating behaviourally, but at the same time have very little interest in what's going on. And then the third level is what we call cognitive engagement. And that's when they're investing and they're incorporating a sense of effort into trying to understand the ideas. They want to keep working on things and really understand it. So they're connected to it to try and develop their knowledge and their skills in a cognitive sense. So really quickly and broadly, there's the three sorts of engagement: behavioural engagement, emotional engagement, and cognitive engagement. And often we think what we really want is cognitive engagement, and that's true, but we want actually all three, because we certainly know there's some students who go through their maths education who are cognitively engaged, who learn it quite well and do quite well at school, but in the end they just don't like it and they avoid it as much as they can. And this is more common than you think. So when you're building your lessons and you're working with students in class, let's see if we can build these three sorts of engagements in the lesson. Now, what I've put down here, and again, this is for you to revisit after, is how some of the things might be noticed in the classroom. How might you see or be able to tell if students are engaged? Because as a teacher, you can be quite busy in doing your teaching work and you might not be aware whether they're engaged or not. Given the importance of engagement in terms of students' ongoing participation in mathematics, these are some things you could look out for. And I would encourage you to really try and see it. When you're on practicum, maybe, if you're not busy working or taking a class, have a look in the back and see if you can see some of this sort of stuff. So behavioural engagement, are they attentive? Are they responding? Do they want to ask questions? Do they persist? Emotional engagement, look for expressions of being happy, or are they positive? Do they show a good attitude? Are they valuing what they're doing? Are they showing interest? Those sorts of things. All right, so a little harder to see than the behavioural engagement, but still often as a teacher you can perceive these sorts of things. And then cognitive engagement, you might even look at their work samples after they finish. You might not be able to see it while you're in the lesson, but when they've finished it, what have they written down, or what have they done on the computer, or what have they made with the materials you're working with? Can you see a sense of engaging intellectually and cognitively with what's going on? Have they tried some of the strategies? So just some ways of seeing as a teacher, because while we say engagement's important, it's also critical that you as a teacher can actually tell what's going on. So then you can respond. So if you're trying something, you can see that the kids are behavioural engaged, emotionally engaged, but they're not learning anything in particular that you're aiming for, then you'd need to change your approach, because just having behavioural and emotional engagement is not enough. Now, again, this is a video and some questions for you to follow up after. We don't do these recorded lectures like we would do on-campus lecture, where we would show it and get you to do this in groups. In the lecture, we give you some of these tasks and then you can do them after. And again, the link will be on the slides, which will be in the Learning at Griffith site. And then here are the questions here you can see. So have a look at the video, and it shows you an elementary school in America where they try and work with teachers to look at these sorts of things of engagement through their language and ideas and other things. See if some of these things ring true. See if you think they're positive. Now, of course, when you go and teach, most of you won't be going to teach in the United States, you'll be teaching in Australia. So you can't just take necessarily these ideas and dump them in your classroom. But while you're watching it and thinking about these questions I've put there, can you then think about your own teaching? What would you like to incorporate in your own practice? you haven't got a class at the moment, but think back to the class you had on prac. Which of these things might have worked with them? How could have you done it? Because in the end, what we're hoping you'll do is use all these ideas to develop your teaching practice. And how you develop it wouldn't necessarily be the same as how I would do it or how someone else's do it. But it's a teaching practice that's really engaging for the students and is responsive to those kids in your site where you're teaching. So again, here's the levels of engagement. I'm following the same pattern of behavioural, emotional and cognitive. And again, you might use these to think back at the video, but also this helps you see some practical ways whether the engagement is just a low investment or a high investment. And again, I'm not going to read it to you now, you can read it after. But what we're looking for is high engagement, high investment in what they're learning, through what they do, through how they respond emotionally, and what they're thinking and what they learn. So use these as a guide if that helps you as well. So I've tried to present this in a few different ways to give you some lists or frameworks that might help you understand your own teaching practice and how you might evaluate it to promote student engagement. Now this could apply to any subject of course, but it's particularly important in mathematics because unfortunately in Australia we have so many students who disengaged, and maybe that was one of you at school. And so one of the things you need to do over these 4 years of your pre-service teacher program is to re-engage. So when you go out and teach, you're not teaching students to disengage with mathematics. So although these come from a theoretical foundation, I hope that they're really practical and they're useful for you in your teaching practice. Now, this is it's a bit of fun, but it's also some things we've heard teachers say that can stop student engagement. So the first one I've got there, you can't pitch the mathematics to the middle of the class as some students miss out. That's why it has to be pitched to the bottom. Even though, yes, some kids have done it before, revision can't hurt. All right, so this was said by a teacher who was really concerned about the kids who had been struggling a bit with maths. And so her response was, you just got to pitch it at the bottom. So what might be some problems with that? Again, you can stop this video and have a think if you like, but it's certainly not acceptable just to pitch it at the bottom, or indeed to pitch it at the top or the middle. And we'll continue to look at diversity as we go through this course. A second thing I've heard is teaching mathematics content and completing curriculum requirements is my main responsibility, not student engagement. So what do you think's wrong with that statement? It's really common, people won't necessarily say it, but if you go to a lot of places, the goal is just to teach the curriculum. I'm just going to teach it, I've got to get through. We can't stop if kids are struggling or uninterested, we've just got to teach it. As if your job is to teach regardless of whether anyone's learning anything. Right? And engagement is part of the learning. So again, something to think about and something that we commonly might not say, but certainly do in mathematics classrooms. Third thing, even if you have some great ideas that could engage, there just is not time for it. So again, another statement we've heard commonly, or sometimes when we try and look at some innovations or different ways of doing things, some things we'll hear. So again, here's another clip for you to follow up after. And again, if we're in the same room together, we'd watch it together and look at some of these questions. But these are some things that people say and do in classrooms that can lead to disengagement. How can you avoid the overly flattery responses to students? Right, so I've seen, and I've probably done it myself too, a student does something fairly insignificant and you praise them as if it's awesome, the greatest thing you've ever seen. Now, that can be disengaging for a student because first of all, they know it's not that great and they can be a bit even embarrassed that you're making such a big deal of it. But there's some other things there again. I want you to consider these things in the light of the video. All right, so here, what are some things that you can do to promote student engagement in class? And if we haven't already said it, Student engagement is really important in terms of the ongoing success of the students and their commitment to doing mathematics throughout the rest of their schooling and into their careers. If we have students who disengage from maths, who dislike it, who don't want to do it, who avoid it, they're in danger of, first of all, sabotaging the possibilities for their future career and indeed not succeeding as successfully as they could. So here's some things, and you might come up with some more. First of all, try and emphasize the relevance of mathematics. Now, when we do this, we want to relate it to the students' lives, and as much as we can, their lives now. I remember one time I did a fantastic lesson about percentages, and I talked to the students about mortgages. And I thought this would be really good. It connects to the real world, as if they're living in the pretend world, I suppose. And so I prepared this lesson, I had this stuff about mortgages, and I did it with the students, and it went really flat for them to learn about percentages. It was really flat. And I was really disappointed about why it didn't work. I thought this would be really connecting to their real lives in the future. But the problem was it didn't connect to their real lives now. They didn't care about a mortgage. They didn't think they'd ever have a mortgage. They hadn't even considered it. So it did connect to some sort of real world, but it didn't connect to their lives now. So try and connect to the students' real lives now. You know, if some event's coming up in the year in your area or even worldwide, so the Olympics in 2024, for example, how can you connect some maths to the Olympics? The kids will be engaged because they're already interested in it. So find things that the kids are already interested in it and see if you can relate the maths to that. At least show them that the mathematics they're using is useful and relevant to someone, even if it might not be useful to them in what they're interested in. But as you will probably be well aware, one of the biggest complaints we get about mathematics is this is irrelevant and useless. So if we can overtly help them to see that it is relevant and useful, then they're more likely to engage. Second thing is try and enhance student autonomy and empowerment. Give them choices of what to do. Help them, if you can, to come up with some of their own questions. Now the problem here can be sometimes that their questions diverge so widely that they might move away from the central concept you're trying to develop. But within some parameters, see if they can come up with some of their own questions and choices. Problem posing is a really powerful way to get students engaged, because if they pose the question, then they'll be invested in trying to find the answer. And if they want to find some answers or solutions, then they'll be more inclined to learn the maths and engage in it along the way. Another one, and it relates to the first one, emphasize student interests. That's something that's specific to their age group and their activities that they do outside of school or around school. But what are they interested in? And the challenge was for me when I was teaching that I was always do it with what I'm interested in, and unfortunately the kids weren't always interested in the same things. So try and find things that they're interested in. One activity I used to do at the start of the year was get the kids to give them a big piece of paper, and in the middle draw a circle and put in it their hobby or something they're really interested in. And then the next thing I'd say to them is, okay, now I want you to try and find out all the mathematics involved in your topic. The thing that you're interested in, your hobby. So if one kid put down surfing, he could put about the shape of the boards, he could put about the tides and the distance travelled, the costs involved and that sort of thing. And then when they did it, I asked, okay, go away and find out some stuff and prepare a poster about it. Now the beauty of this is if some student ever comes up to you and said, this is boring, you can say, well, it's not my fault, it's your hobby. But instead of starting with maths and trying to put it onto something, what we're doing is starting with what they're interested in and trying to pull out the maths from there. There's lots of things you can do for this, and I'm sure you've already got lots of ideas, even from your experiences in the classroom over the last couple of years and your years as a student. The last thing is try and emphasise interpersonal relationships through things like cooperative learning. Help them to work together to solve problems. This works really well because then there's a sense of engagement together and they can get a sense of group ownership of working to the solution. Now, of course, there's a whole pile of teaching issues and things around that. Helping kids learn how to work together just by lumping them in a group doesn't mean they will necessarily work as a group, and you'd have to teach them that. But there's a lot of research and experience from many teachers who've said when kids work in groups on problems, it doesn't have to be all the time. It could be just a pair, could be a three. But when they get to work in groups on problems, and even more so if they've posed those problems, then there's high levels of engagement from the students, and they learn higher and more complicated mathematics, and they retain it, and they're more willing to engage again in the future. So in this lecture, I've just given a few practical ideas based on the theory of engagement. I hope they're useful. In the end, what we're really keen for is that you develop your own teaching. And as you think about all these things, think about how you might engage kids in your class. And at this stage, of course, you don't have a particular class, but when you get out into the school world, when you're teaching your first class or even on prac, don't just think about the content you're going to teach them, but how can you engage them so that they'll want to keep learning mathematics and they'll see it as important and useful. Anyway, thanks for listening. That's the end of week 2, and I look forward to seeing you in week 3.